Before diving into this incredible story, consider subscribing to the channel and hitting the bell. Every story here has something to say, and you won't want to miss a single one. Little black homeless girl says, "I know how to make your daughter walk again." Millionaire left shocked. In the icy streets of Chicago in the middle of winter, the city was transformed into a desert of concrete frozen by the biting wind. Dirty snow covered the sidewalks, passers-by moved in a hurry, bundled up in their designer coats, their eyes fixed straight ahead, as if to avoid any human distraction. No one wanted to meet the gaze of those who lived outside. Those who were called invisible. Under one of the old rusty steel bridges, at the intersection of Lower Wacker Drive, a little black girl of 10 years old named Layla, her frail figure blended into the shadows of the concrete, and her presence often went unnoticed. Yet, for those who took the time to look, there was something disconcerting about her, a strange grace, a silent strength, as if the child carried a mystery that even adults had stopped seeking. Layla lived with her mother, Marjorie, a former nurse who fell into poverty after a series of tragic misfortunes, a sudden dismissal, a chronic illness, unpaid rent. Then the street. Marjorie often coughed, short of breath, her emaciated body shivering under a threadbare blanket. Yet, every night, she sang softly to her daughter, old lullabies learned from her own grandmother, songs from the South, full of spirituality and melancholy. Layla, on the other hand, never asked for money. She sang. Her strange whispers sometimes echoed between the bridge pillars like an echo from another world. A pure, fragile, yet hypnotic voice. A newspaper vendor once said, "She doesn't really sing. She heals." But no one really wanted to listen to him. The few who did stop often left in silence, a little disturbed, without really knowing why. Layla had no home, no school, no toys. She'd never had a birthday, never had a Christmas. Yet in her amber eyes, there was a bright, almost luminous glow. It was as if she saw things others had forgotten over time, the pain behind the smiles, the fear beneath the costumes, the beauty hidden in the distress. She observed the world with a wisdom that some only attain at the end of a lifetime. A few miles away, on the other side of town, where the streets are cleared before the snow even falls, rose a tower of steel and glass. At the top, in a penthouse overlooking the frozen Lake Michigan, lived Jonathan Hale, a man whose name appeared in the Forbes rankings every year. A tech genius, a feared investor, and the creator of one of the world's largest artificial intelligence platforms, Jonathan had built an empire through the power of his analytical mind. He possessed everything others coveted: classic cars, properties in several countries, a dedicated staff, masterpieces, contracts worth billions. But none of these trophies could fill the void that had grown in his heart over the past year. Because his daughter, Emily, 6 years old, had become paralyzed after a sudden accident. A runaway car, a drunk driver, a badly negotiated bend. Emily had survived, but not without after effects. Since then, she had barely spoken. She refused to be hugged. She spent her days motionless in a wheelchair, her eyes lost in space, as if she had locked herself away in an inaccessible inner world. Jonathan, once invincible in the business world, felt powerless in the face of this reality. He had contacted the best neurosurgeons in Boston, rehabilitation specialists in Zurich, the greatest experts in pediatric neurology. He had invested colossal sums in innovative treatments, cell therapies, even alternative methods at a Japanese institute. Nothing had changed. Emily's body remained frozen. Her mind seemed to have deserted her. And every evening, returning from prestigious meetings or conferences, Jonathan would pass by his daughter's bedroom door. He would put his hand on the handle, but wouldn't go in. He didn't know what to say anymore. He didn't know how to be a father anymore. Two existences that were complete opposites. Two worlds that should never have crossed paths. And yet, something that evening was going to upset the established order. It was one of those winter evenings when the city seemed to bite. The wind blew like a blade across faces, passers-by hurried their steps, and even taxis hesitated to venture too far from the main avenues. Melted snow dirtied the sidewalks, and Chicago's buildings seemed to huddle together to keep in the heat. Jonathan Hale, dressed in a black Italian coat, left the prestigious Chicago Art Institute, where a charity gala for pediatric research had just been held. The painful irony was that they had served champagne at $600 a bottle, but no one had been able to give him a single answer about his daughter's recovery. He descended the marble steps, furious, his phone pressed to his ear, barking orders at his assistant. "Cancel tomorrow's appointment with the Swiss neurologist. I don't want to hear any more talk of experimental therapies. It's intellectual fraud." He hung up abruptly. Then he stopped dead. On the sidewalk directly across the street, a strange little crowd had formed. A dozen people, delivery drivers, a security guard, 2 teenage girls in school uniforms, stood in a semicircle around a silent scene. Curious despite himself, Jonathan approached, pushing people aside with the confidence of a man accustomed to crowds falling silent for him. And there, in the middle of the circle, he saw her. A little black girl, barefoot despite the snow, her clothes dirty but carefully arranged, was kneeling. Her long curly hair framed a calm, almost solemn face. She was singing, or rather, murmuring a kind of sweet, primitive, almost sacred melody. Between her trembling hands rested the head of an ailed stray dog, visibly injured in the hind leg. The dog was panting, visibly in pain. Then, before everyone's astonished eyes, he stopped moaning. He closed his eyes, and slowly, very slowly, straightened up. He placed his paw on the frozen ground. He was no longer limping. A silence fell. Then a murmur of surprise. A teenage girl covered her mouth. A delivery man dropped his helmet. Jonathan, for his part, felt his heart skip a beat. It wasn't the dog that had upset him, nor the melody, it was the intensity in the child's eyes. That old look. As if she knew. As if she saw. He stepped forward, breaking the circle, his leather shoes soiled with slush. "Did you do this?" he asked, his tone half haughty, half incredulous. The girl looked up. No fear. No embarrassment. Only absolute calm. "I do nothing. I remind things of what they are. Even when they have forgotten it." Jonathan frowned. "What does that mean?" Layla tilted her head slightly. Her voice was low and calm, a contrast to her childlike appearance. "I know when someone can be fixed. And I know your daughter can walk again." A shudder ran through the man. He took a step back. "Do you know me?" "No. But I feel his sadness on you," she replied. "That it's like a shadow. A heavy shadow that clings to your skin. It comes from her. It can go away, but you have to help it." A heavy silence fell. Jonathan no longer knew if he was looking at a bright little girl, a manipulative child, or something he wasn't ready to understand. He wanted to run away. To regain control. But his heart, despite himself, clung to these words, "I know your daughter can walk again." He looked around. The passers-by were continuing on their way. The old dog had lain down further away, peacefully. The little girl had started singing softly again, as if she had never been interrupted. So, against all logic, against all prudence, against all rationality, he uttered these words. "Do you want to come? One night. At my place." Layla stared at him for a long time. Then she stood up, without saying a word. She took one last look at the dog. Then at the sky. And she nodded. Jonathan couldn't believe it. He bent down, opened the car door, and helped her in. His stunned driver didn't ask any questions. The silence in the car was heavy. Jonathan kept his eyes fixed on the road. Layla, on the other hand, stared at the city lights with a kind of inner peace, as if she already knew where this was all leading. The next morning, Jonathan Hale's house was bathed in an unusual silence. Not the cold silence of boredom or sanitized luxury, a suspended, almost sacred silence. As if the walls themselves were holding their breath. In the large bedroom upstairs, bathed in soft light filtered by white silk curtains, Emily, 6 years old, lay motionless in her wheelchair. Her long brown hair fell to her shoulders, and her eyes, once so lively, stared unseeingly at the snow-covered trees outside the bay window. She no longer played. No longer spoke. No longer even cried. Then, without noise, Layla came in. She hadn't knocked. It was as if she knew this moment shouldn't be announced. She wore a simple, oversized dress, given to her by the housekeeper the day before, and walked barefoot on the cold wooden floor. Yet she wasn't shivering. Her gaze was calm. Determined. Ancient. Emily didn't turn her head when she arrived. But Layla didn't seem bothered. She approached quietly, and without a word, sat down next to her, on a small cushion on the floor. She observed the girl, not with pity, but with naked, respectful compassion. As if she were speaking as an equal. Soul to soul. Then, slowly, she reached out her hands and took Emily's. Cold, thin, almost lifeless hands. Layla closed her eyes. The silence grew even deeper. Even the ticking of the clock seemed to stop. And in that suspended peace, she whispered. Not like a speech, but like a prayer to a wounded heart. You're not broken. You just forgot how to get back up. You're hiding because the world has been too hard, too fast. But you are stronger than you think. These simple words were like caresses in the air. Words that needed no explanation, because they spoke a language older than speech. Emily slowly turned her eyes to Layla. And then, like a dam breaking, a tear fell. Then another. The first since the accident. In the shadow of the door, Jonathan, standing there, frozen, felt his throat tighten. He didn't dare breathe. He watched this unreal scene, as if he were witnessing something sacred. His hands clenched, his heart beating to a rhythm he had forgotten. Layla, still without abruptness, then placed both hands on Emily's legs. Not as a miraculous gesture, but as a mother touches her wounded child, to say, I'm here. You can try. You don't need magic, she said in a barely audible voice. Just from memory. Listen to your body. It remembers. It's waiting for you. Emily closed her eyes. At first, nothing happened. Then, a jolt. Almost imperceptible. A micro-tremor in his left foot. Then a slight movement in his right knee. Jonathan clapped a hand over his mouth, his eyes wide. Emily inhaled. A breath deeper than he'd heard in months. She opened her eyes. And looked down at her legs. She moved them. Slowly at first. Then a little more. Then, with a hesitant gesture, she placed both hands on the armrests of her chair. Her face tensed. She tensed her muscles. Her body trembled. But it responded. And then, before his father's eyes, Emily is on the rise. Not like in a movie, not in a dramatic explosion. No. Flickering. Fragile. But standing. Standing. Jonathan let out a muffled cry. Emily. The little girl turned towards him with a bright, tear-stained gaze and a shy smile. She took a step. Then another. She was walking. Not fast. Not perfectly. But she walked. And Layla, still sitting on the ground, watched the scene with a gentle expression, like a star watching a flower open. She doesn't say anything. She smiled. As if she knew all along. In the days following this incredible event, the agitation set in the Hale house. Doctors paraded, experts followed one after the other, scans multiplied. MRIs, electromyograms, postural and neurological examinations were repeated. All of Emily's files were reread. The diagnoses made over a year, the aborted treatments, the final conclusions, irreversible lesions, partial paraplegia, muscle atrophy. But there you have it. The child who, according to the greatest specialists, should not never walk again, now stood standing. And she was dancing. Yes. Danced. In the light-filled living room, barefoot on the parquet floor, Emily was spinning, clumsily but joyfully, laughing out loud. She sometimes fell, but got up again without fear. She ran to her father and threw herself into his arms. She spoke, asked questions, told his dreams. Everything was back. Mobility. Voice, the life. Doctors were forced to admit the unthinkable. No physiological cause justified his recovery. There had been no surgery, no new drug, no physical treatment recent enough to explain such a remission. It was as if his body had simply decided to repair itself. "It's impossible," said Professor Hargrove, a neurologist from New York. "It's incomprehensible," replied his colleague from Boston. But Jonathan was no longer looking for answers in books. He was looking Layla. One evening, while they were alone in the large living room, Jonathan sat down opposite her. He had that look powerful men have when they encounter something they can't control. That mixture of admiration, fear, and humility. "Tell me. How did you do it?" he asked, almost whispering. Layla sat cross-legged on the rug, playing with an old doll Emily had given her. She looked up, peaceful. "I didn't do anything magical." "Are you a prodigy? A healer? A scientist? A shaman?" insisted TL. She shook her head gently. "My grandmother taught me that some pain isn't in the body, but in the soul." Jonathan remained silent. When something breaks in a child's soul, Layla continues, the body shuts down. It forgets. It protects itself. But sometimes, all it takes is a gentle presence. A hand that says, "You are safe now." Then the soul returns. And the body remembers. She looked him straight in the eyes. Emily didn't need medicine. She needed to be seen. Really. Not as a patient. As a person. Jonathan looked down, overwhelmed. He understood, finally. For a year, he had bet everything on science, numbers, results. He had searched solutions, not links. An Edessa homeless child who had just reminded him that sometimes love is the beginning of all healing. Jonathan then made an irrevocable decision. Layla and her mother, Marjorie, would never sleep under a bridge again. He offered them a room in his home, then, a few days later, their own apartment, carefully decorated, a few blocks away. He hired doctors to treat Marjorie, restoring her strength. He hired a private tutor for Layla, then enrolled her in a prestigious school where she quickly shone with her rare intelligence and acute sensitivity. But more than that, he offered them a home. Not just a roof, a family. Emily, for her part, never left Layla's side. They sometimes slept in the same room, told each other stories, created dances that they performed in front of a moved, sometimes tearful Jonathan. Layla now called the man Mr. Hale, and soon Papa Joe. And one morning at breakfast, Emily, her teeth full of jam, whispered to her father, "Can we say we're a family now?" Jonathan closed his eyes, moved. He gently stroked the two girls' hair. "Yes, my dear. A family of the heart. The truest of all." The years passed. And with them, Layla grew. But her gaze never changed, it retained that mysterious depth, that peaceful light of an old soul trapped in the body of a young woman. At the age of 16, with her experience and, above all, the unwavering support of Jonathan Hale, Layla founded what would become a quiet revolution in healing, the Awakening Foundation. The building didn't look like an ordinary clinic. No cold walls, no sanitized corridors, no smell of disinfectant. The center, housed in a renovated former convent on the edge of town, was bathed in natural light. Wildflower gardens surrounded the grounds, and the sound of children's laughter mingled with the sound of the wind in all seasons. Here, we didn't talk about patients, but about souls in reconstruction, the children who were taken and had experienced the unthinkable, accidents, abuse, orphanages, wars, exile. Some no longer spoke. Others screamed at night. Many had stopped believing in love, or in life. And yet, the awakening happened. Sometimes in a week. Sometimes in a year. But always, it happened. Not by magic. but by presence. Layla didn't promise a miracle cure. She simply sat with them. She listened. She didn't diagnose. She medesilence's hands on shoulders. Simple words. She sometimes told them her story. Her childhood under a bridge, the cold nights, the oblivion. Then the light. Love. Memory. Your body is not your enemy, she said to a teenage war amputee. You are not what they made you, she whispered to a little girl who had survived a violent home. You can remember. You can rise again. Not to become who you were, but to become who you truly are. And it worked. Because she believed real lie in each of them. Hospitals began to speak of her in hushed tones, then out loud. Doctors, at first skeptical, came to observe. What they saw shocked them. No invasive treatment. No miracle pill. But results. Progress where all hope had been abandoned. She didn't heal with her hands. She awakened what was asleep. She reminded the medical world of what so many had forgotten: the body remembers, but the soul decides, and when you heal the soul, the body can follow. The press seized on the phenomenon. It was called the girl with silent hands. The child who spoke to the wounded. The living memory of courage. She was invited to speak at conferences in Boston, Paris, and Johannesburg. Universities created programs inspired by her methods. But she, humble as she was, refused to be considered a guru or a celebrity. She simply repeated. It's not me. It's them. I'm just here to hold up a mirror to them. And tell them, you're not broken. You're on a journey. During this time, Jonathan Hale, the once cold, hurried, results-obsessed man had changed. He was no longer seen on TV sets talking about his investments. He had left several boards of directors, refused millions. Now, he sat on a single structure, the Awakening Foundation. He went there almost every day, dressed simply, without a tie. He brought games, read stories to the children, served meals with the volunteers. He laughed. He listened. He lived. And most of all, he watched his daughter Emily run through the gardens, holding Layla's hand. These two girls, so different, but united by a bond deeper than blood, the rebirth. One day, at sunset, he confided to Layla, his eyes moist. I first saw you as a miracle. Then as a mystery. Today, I see you as truth. The most beautiful I have ever met. Layla smiled softly. I only helped you open a door, Papa Joe. You walked through it yourself. And so, the once lonely and broken billionaire realized he had found more than just a cure for his daughter. He had found a truth. A miracle is not always a light from above. Sometimes it's a small voice, in the cold, which simply tells you, I can help you. Believe me. And if we listen to it, then begins the most beautiful of healings, that of the soul.